Controversy over a new aircraft carrier being built in Newport News. It's supposed to be the first carrier named after an African American.
But now, sources say the Navy is considering stripping that name and instead possibly naming it after President Trump. ABC's Olivia Rubin has more.
Today, the Navy is considering stripping the name of one of World War II's most famed black service members, Doris Miller, from a new aircraft carrier, according to three sources familiar with the matter.
At Pearl Harbor, it was an African-American sailor, Doris Miller, who was among the first to return enemy fire.
Sources telling ABC News the Navy is considering naming that ship after President Trump, who mused during his first term about the very possibility.
Fire. Last month, the Navy announced that the next American aircraft carrier will bear the proud name of USS Doris Miller. That's pretty good. They won't give me that honor. That's a big boat. That's a big ship. All right, one day maybe, but in the meantime, you're right, one day.
Trump never served in the military, deferring 5 times, including once for bone spurs. The carrier under construction in Virginia would be the first aircraft carrier named for a black American, honoring Miller's heroic actions during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Miller served as a cook aboard the USS West Virginia during the 1941 attack and helped move the ship's wounded captain to safety before taking control of an anti-aircraft gun despite having no formal training. He's credited with shooting down at least one Japanese aircraft. In a statement to ABC News, the NAACP calling it, quote, a slap in the face to every war hero and every service member who has worn the uniform. And Miller's great niece, Selena James, telling ABC News her heart is, quote, very heavy on the news.
So I think it's a great disappointment. It's a letdown. And it kind of make you wonder, like, you know, are we good enough? Are we equal?
And the White House referred questions from ABC News to the Pentagon, which did not respond. A Navy spokesperson saying they have no announcements at this time. Olivia Rubin, ABC News, Washington.
Hello, Bobby Jones here from MeidasTouch and Valor Media Networks. The United States Navy has dominated worldwide and domestic headlines for the last few months. That's for obvious reasons. The conflict in Iran has caused many observers to wonder what the current state of America's fleet is, and more importantly, where does it go moving forward? Its presence around the world has been something that many people just took for granted, but due to the latest decisions by the President of the United States, the fleet finds itself under stress. One of the stories that's sort of attached to this, but talks about the future of America's fleet, is the naming of America's next aircraft carrier. August 20th, CNN made a report that it is rumored that President Trump is going to have his name placed on the latest aircraft carrier, currently CVN 81. Now, the reason this is a big deal is because it was his first administration that decided that the name of that carrier would be named after Doris Miller. And I'll get into him in a second. But the fact that this is even happening has made a lot of people pause because it goes outside of all sorts of not just naval tradition, but the message being sent about who's being removed is just as powerful. So let's just talk about what it means to name a ship in the United States fleet. Well, the power resides with the Secretary of the Navy. He has his prerogative. He can put whoever he wants on that ship, whatever title. Typically, aircraft carriers have been named after battles or after presidents or after a certain type of personality or, in rare cases, other Americans. What do I mean by this? Well, I mean, basically, there's really no convention for aircraft carriers being named, which is different than, say, destroyers, which are named after heroes, and then cruisers, which are named after battles, etc. Aircraft carriers have always been the wild card. So when it was announced in the first administration that President Trump was going to allow a ship to be named after one of the few heroes at Pearl Harbor, it was amazing. It was amazing because it was a black man who really probably did not get the just due he was deserved while he was still alive. And I'll get into that in a second. But the way this works is the Secretary of the Navy has his committee put together a naming convention. They come up with a name, and then it's basically approved. The ship becomes commissioned, and it serves 40 to 50 years. At least that's how it's supposed to work. But one of the things that seems to be a theme, but not once again perfect, is the person who has their name on that aircraft carrier usually is deceased. Now, there have been some rare exceptions to that, but overwhelmingly, that has been the convention. So who was Doris Miller? Doris Miller was born in 1919, the son of a sharecropper, and grew up in Waco, Texas. The location of where he grew up is significant because it was the Deep South, where post-Civil War racial hatred and Jim Crow ran rampant. As a matter of fact, there was a black man that was burned alive in 1916, just 3 years before he was born. In Waco County alone, there in Texas, they had over 40 lynchings. However, he still decided to serve his country. He enlisted in the Navy in 1939 after being forced to really drop out of school to help ends meet. This is something that is not unusual to blacks born in the Deep South at that time. Now, as he went into the Navy, he could only become really a mess attendant, someone who served food, did laundry, because at that time, the Navy was locked to black men from doing what they called general ratings, the combat arms, gunner's mates, bosun's mates, the things that make an actual Navy go. He was not allowed to do that. And so because of that, he received no training in armaments, no gunnery training, no nothing, which is what makes what happened on December 7th, 1941 so spectacular. He was doing his mess attendant duties, in this case laundry, when the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor happened. Without any training whatsoever, he gets to the bridge and sees that his captain was mortally wounded. He evacuates his captain to safety and then mans the anti-air guns that were on his ship. And what's amazing about this is no training, was able to continue to fire until he ran out of ammunition. Now, from various reports, anywhere from 1 to 6 planes he may have been responsible for shooting down. No one really knows the number. But here's the thing. After he finished firing the weapon until it could not fire anymore, he went back into the water, which by this point is oil infested and on fire, personal harm, and goes and rescues sailors that were injured, that may have died if it wasn't for his actions. It was quite remarkable for a man who, number one, was never trained to do it, and number two, should have been looking out and trying to protect himself in all of the chaos. What's even more remarkable is you would think an action like that would garner the Medal of Honor. The actions of Doris Miller that day easily should have warranted him the Medal of Honor. Why was he not awarded that, you may ask? I'll give you one guess. He was a black man. There were 15 Medal of Honors given for actions at Pearl Harbor, but not one given to a black sailor. As a matter of fact, right after the attack, the accounts of who did it were almost lost because they just named an unnamed Negro. It took the NAACP to dig into it to actually find out who the person was. And Chester Nimitz himself, the fleet admiral, the new fleet admiral, awarded Doris Miller his Navy Cross. It's interesting. In 1997, the United States Army went back and took a look at all of the possible Medal of Honor winners who were black that were not awarded it solely due to their skin color. And they went back and gave them their Medals of Honor. It was 7 total. The Navy has never done that. Never done it. It'd be interesting to see who and what would be given an award if they actually had a fair awards board to have that happen. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Doris Miller continued to serve until he was killed in action on the USS West Virginia during the action in the Pacific in World War II. So to recap, you're talking about a man that barely had an education, that grew up in the segregated Deep South, joined the Navy anyway, was only limited to be a mess attendant, and was able to fight back at America's lowest point, saving lives and shooting down Japanese planes to which he was not trained, and then later dies on board USS West Virginia while he continued to serve a nation that did not fully recognize who he was or what he brought to the table. As I mentioned earlier, aircraft carriers typically are named after presidents, but there have been exceptions like, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz had an aircraft carrier named after him, the Nimitz. But you also have a couple of congressmen, senators, Carl Vinson, the John C. Stennis, that had things named after them as well. Now, these were political people. Okay. But I want to highlight Carl Vinson for a second because he is from my home state of Georgia. Okay. He signed the Southern Manifesto where he wanted segregation in America to last pretty much forever. Okay. He was a controversial figure based on his race relations, but he was a champion of the United States Navy, and they named an aircraft carrier after him. But we're arguing about whether Doris Miller should get that same recognition, and what's interesting about it, John C. Stennis signed that manifesto as well. And yet he got an aircraft carrier named after him. As a matter of fact, these individuals helped try to keep the Navy segregated after 1948 and the executive order that Truman signed integrating America's armed forces. And so what's interesting to me about this, nobody has ever tried to change the name of those aircraft carriers despite the true legacy of the individuals of whom they are named. This is not about actually the naming convention of U.S. Navy warships. This is not about who gets to say what and what's named on an aircraft carrier. This is very simple. This is a choice. This is a choice between two individuals, one that made the ultimate sacrifice for their country, even though the country went out of its way to limit how he could serve, what he could serve as, and really what he could do. He rose above it all and was an example of it doesn't matter about rank. It doesn't matter about color. It matters about character. Or it could be simply another name plastered on the ultimate vanity project that many people will soon forget as soon as that person has left this plane of existence. Which would you rather have sailors try to emulate in your Navy? That is the question.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.